issued a ban on all international travels for top government appointees, ministers, those who are heading the MMDCEs as well. And he says that he since he wrote this 24 hours ago, he hasn't had any reply because he wants an update on that.
And so there were 7 questions in that initial letter that the letter he sent yesterday, asking about whether the ban is in force, an update on that, and the savings that may have been done as a result of that. There were 7 different questions that he asked, and that letter came out yesterday.
Yeah, but what does he say though about this UNCTAD controversy?
With regards to that, first of all, even with the ban, he makes the point in this latest statement that the inability of government to provide an update on the status of the ban and information on the promised new travel guidelines on the travels portrays a government which is still very high on propaganda and very low on actual delivery.
Okay.
That's why he proceeds this particular statement.
Hold on. Let's quickly deal with that, and then we'll come to what he says about the UNCTAD shortly, because I understand that he joins us on the telephone line right now. Samakujo Tablakwa, thank you, sir, for your time here on Top Story.
Thank you, Evans, for having me.
Also joining us right now is the Deputy Chief of Staff, Abu Junapo. Mr. Junapo, thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you very much, Evans, for having me, and very good evening to your cherished listeners.
Let me start with you, Mr. Junapo. Samakujo Tablakwa says you haven't given an update on the travel ban, and I want to quote what he says here. It says, for 4 months thereafter, the inability of government to provide an update on the status of the ban and information on the promised new travel guidelines on government travels portrays a government which is still very high on propaganda, very low on actual delivery. Your reaction?
Well, thank you very much, Evans. Let me begin by dealing with 2 tangential matters. First is the fact that the matters relating to the travel ban were not for public consumption. Now, it's not surprising that the letter written by the Chief of Staff dated 21st June 2018 got leaked, because obviously it was addressed to sector ministers, regional ministers, MMDCs, all heads of government agencies. And with that kind of wide circulation, it shouldn't be surprising that it gets leaked. So it was not for public consumption, but be that as it may, and given the circumstances we find ourselves in, where the minority spokesperson for foreign affairs has made these issues public, we have no choice but to deal with the issues as they are in the public domain. I say this because these are confidential government correspondence which ordinarily ought not to be put out in the public domain. Now, let me deal with the second issue, which is the propaganda bit. This government is not engaged in propaganda. The president is a very serious-minded president who deals with matters substantively and deals with them solely in the public interest. And the question about government travels, officials of government and their travels, has been an issue with our 4th Republican dispensation in 1993. The president is sought to deal with it. Upon coming into office, we did not inherit any guidelines. There's never been any guidelines. And the president, in his wisdom, instructed the Chief of Staff to issue this directive to all government ministers, regional ministers, MMDCs, and heads of government agencies on the 21st June 2018 to temporarily put a ban on government travels. And the rationale for the ban can be found in the letter authored by the Chief of Staff, and I quote, she says, "Guidelines in respect of future foreign travels aimed at minimizing disruption to government domestic work will be communicated to you shortly," end quote. Evans, I want to report to the Ghanaian people that the president has been at work. He is engaged in broad consultations. He's done a lot of work on this matter. The office of the president has been at it, and these guidelines have been sent to all government officials. I hold in my hand, and if you want, I can furnish you with a copy of a letter dated 14th August 2018 with reference number SCR/DB236/378/01/B, authored by Honorable Akusia Frema Osei Opare, Chief of Staff, and addressed to all sector ministers and deputies, all regional ministers and deputies, all MMDCs, all heads of government agencies. And I do this reluctantly, but I still have to do it because of the attitude that the Honorable Member of Parliament for South-Tong and Ranking Member for Foreign Affairs, the attitude that he's adopted. I have to do it. The Chief of Staff has sent these guidelines to all government officials. And Evans, with your permission, I'll quote. Reference is made to my earlier letter number SCR/DB 236/378/01/B dated 21st June 2018 on banning of foreign travel for the above-mentioned persons of government. I forward to you the, quote, guidelines on foreign travels, end quote, for your necessary information and compliance. Your attention is, however, drawn to paragraph number 4, where you are requested to submit statutory travel plans for the rest of the year 2018 to this office by 22nd August 2018. Please accept for action and acknowledge receipt. And if you go to the guidelines sets out the purpose for which these guidelines have been put in place, and it responds to the objective for which the president placed this ban. Paragraph 2, I quote, purpose. The purpose of this guideline is to streamline the travels of senior government appointees so as to achieve the following. 1, minimize disruption to government work program. 2, ensure better coordination of government business at home and abroad. 3, judicious use of public funds. So, Ivan, let me conclude by saying that the objective or the rationale for the travel ban placed in by the president has been realized since August 14th of this year. The guidelines have been put together. They've been sent to all the affected government officials. So, I don't know.
But the question is the ban still in force or has been lifted?
The ban was put in place, and I did speak to this eloquently. The ban was put in place to allow the office of the president to put in place these guidelines as to regulate foreign travels by government officials. The guidelines have since been sent, have since been concluded, discussed and concluded and approved by the president and communicated to government officials since 14th August 2018. So the automatic inference is clear to all of us.
That the ban is no longer in place.
But the guidelines are in place. And I'm saying to you that the ban was put in place not for the sake of it, but to allow the office put in place guidelines which had never existed, never existed under Okujedo's government. His ministers and himself could travel at will without any, not within any context, not within any guidelines.
Just to clarify that point, just to clarify that point, I have a copy of travel guidelines issued under the John Mahama administration, and it has details, and a part of it reads: any request letter for travel approval must be received by the Office of the Chief of Staff at least 7 working days before proposed departure date. And this is just an intro to the guideline, and then it goes on to reference the ministerial travel coordination, and these are taken from Minister's Code of Conduct. So it appears that from what I have, there was a travel guideline under the Mahama administration. Appears to have lost. Do I have Mr. Okujedo on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. What's your reaction to what you just heard there? You had a series of questions. Does the answers you've heard address them?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me greet you and greet the Honorable Abu Jinapor and our distinguished listeners. It is important to stress, Evans, that it is not the NDC or the minority or me, for that matter, who made this matter a public issue. It was this government that decided to make public the letter signed by the Honorable Frema Osei-Opare, the Honorable Chief of Staff, on the 21st of June 2018.
I think, in fairness, because I work in the media, I know it was leaked. It's a leaked document that we intercepted.
But you work in the media, and you do know that since that leakage, the government officials could have decided to be quiet or to adopt a low-key approach if Abu Jinapor tells us that it was a confidential matter. But he, in particular, spoke to this matter. I remember that the leak was quite a well-coordinated and syndicated leak, which was on all the front pages of newspapers aligned to the government. He, in particular, spoke to this matter extensively, as he has confirmed this evening, that he spoke eloquently about this matter at the time. The information minister also spoke eloquently about it at the time. Now, 4 months down the line, we are not in the picture. You probably have achieved whatever you wanted to achieve at the time for whatever propaganda effect you had in mind. But you see, governance, we ought to approach it more seriously than this. 4 months down the line, you need to tell us what the situation is. Is the ban still in force?
I think he answered that question. That's what I was asking. What your reaction? That does not answer the. He says it's no longer enforced because now we have a guideline, and that the ban was placed to allow the chief of staff room to put in place these guidelines. Now the guidelines are in place. The ban is no longer necessary.
Evans, but for my open letter yesterday, the people of this country would not have been told that the ban is no longer in force. And from what I know, from my own checks, it does appear that there's been a lot of backdating going on. But I can let that pass. It is important, Evans, to also stress that the statement Abu Jinapor makes that there was no guideline since 1993, and that this is the first time guidelines have been put together for travels. And then he adds that people like me could travel at will. You just get up and travel. It's not true. You dare not do that. You will be fired. Since the era of President Rawlings, there have been guidelines. The chief of staff must see your travel request. The program will be vetted. And government would look at its importance, whether it's relevant. I mean, if they came and decided not to work with guidelines, every government has inherited guidelines. Talk to President Kufuor's chief of staff. There were guidelines. In my latest article this afternoon, I have attached to the article our guidelines, which I obtained from the former chief of staff on how they carried out the assessment and vetted our applications. And I've put that out on his permission, so I can dispel some of these baseless accusations being made out there. It is not true that there have never been guidelines since 1993 and that this is the first time we are going to have guidelines. It is not true. And the more fundamental point, Evans, is that these guidelines, all of these arrangements, ultimately, we want to protect the public purse. We want to make sure that you are attending trips that are useful to the forward march of our country. And we want to make sure that the size of delegation is conscionable, is within the remit of a country that is poor, that is a developing country, so that reasonable observers will see that, yes, this is a country that is not dissipating scarce resources. So far, we have not seen that under this government. We have not seen that. And you've just been discussing, what has outraged the nation so far, the UNCTAD meeting. And I can tell you that we're looking very, very bad in the Committee of Nations. I mean, you go to a meeting with Canada, arrives with a delegation of one. They are sponsoring our Planting for Food and Jobs program. They sent only one person. We are begging the Chinese to take interest in our bauxite for $2 billion. They come with only five people. And remember that China, this is an UNCTAD meeting, the United Nations Conference for Trade and Industry. China is the number one country when it comes to merchandise trade, global merchandise trade. They are number one. Germany is number 3. They all come with a very sizable delegation, not more than 5. Germany 1, Canada 1. And India 1, and then there's even an attempt to defend this. Take a critical, do a content analysis of our list. Did the vice president, who is an economist himself, did he have to send all these 4 economic advisors?
That's a question that we still have. Thankfully, we just managed to get back the Deputy Chief of Staff who is on the line with us on this matter. So stay on the line for me briefly, Mr. Blakwa. Mr. Jinapor, that's the question he's asked, and he says fundamentally why the travel ban was necessary in the first place was, one, to protect government pairs, but also, as you've indicated, so that you don't disrupt government business. He says the traveling party of 21 people to UNCTAD from the vice president's office is a breach of that desire to protect the public purse. Why was it necessary to travel with 21 people to an UNCTAD conference?
Well, thank you, Ivan. But before I do that, if I may quickly just point out that Mr. Honorable Ablakwa is entitled to raise questions publicly about government business, and that's really the work he has to do. He's supposed to keep the government in check. That's the work of the legislature of our country. I have no problem with that. But when you raise issues and you are giving proper and befitting answers, the honorable thing to do is to concede. Because I have his letter here, his open letter. He asked 5 questions. He asked 7 questions. Each of the questions have been answered. I've answered each of the questions. Question number 1, he says, is the ban still in force? I've explained to you that the ban got lifted upon the coming into force of the regulations on 14th August 2018. He said, if not, when was it lifted? I've given the answer. If still in force, when will it be lifted? Are the promised new guidelines ready? The guidelines are here. I can furnish him with a copy. What is contained in the new guidelines? If you get the new guidelines, you will get to know the content of it. So I'm just saying, he's a ranking member for Foreign Affairs. He's done an excellent job by raising this issue in the public domain. He's been giving answers. The honorable thing as a member of parliament is to concede that I was anxious and nervous about these guidelines which were supposed to be put out for government foreign travels and the rest. The answers have been provided. We'll leave it there. We'll move on.
Mr. Ablakwa, quick one.
Let me finish on this.
Yes.
He's made an insinuation that I believe that I don't expect that to be coming from him. Ranking member for Foreign Affairs, he suggests that the Chief of Staff is backdating letters, or that I myself am backdating letters. I will never backdate a letter. I will never do that. It will never be within my reach, and I never expect him, Mr. Ablakwa, to backdate any letter, and I will not make that insinuation of him. So I think he should be honorable, and I accept that he's been giving answers and not impugn criminality on the part of the Chief of Staff or myself. We are backdating letters. Check this out. They are reference numbers. These are public documents. You can check. They were copied. Indeed, they were copied to the Secretary, to the President, Secretary, to the Vice President, the Chief Director, Office of the President. He can verify whether or not these letters were written on 14. He's just been giving answers. You accept it and let's move on.
We can
discuss ANTAC now.
Yes, very, very quickly, and because of the points you've raised, very quickly, Mr. Ablakwa, you concede?
You know that I'm not one to qualm or to have qualms or to quibble over concessions if I have to. I just had the suspicion I have because I had listened to Pius Hajide, the Deputy Minister for Information, earlier, and he was not this emphatic. He said that in the coming days we will hear about the new guidelines. And so listening to Pius Hajide, I had the impression that they were now putting the guidelines together. And so that's why, and he's also a high-ranking government official, the Deputy Minister for Information. And that is why I have not been too sure, but I did not seek to impose criminality at all. I mean, okay. I've said publicly that the Honorable Chief of Staff is a woman I respect highly, a very distinguished public servant. Abu Jinapor himself is a good brother, and I would not impugn any wrongdoing on their part.
I'm grateful.
Because of the conflicting government communication, that is why. But I must also add that not all the answers have been answered. I'm grateful that some have been answered.
And I'm pretty sure that
I did, because you remember that...
unfortunately, on this one, I sort of need to step in because we need to talk about the UNCTAD, and I want to get answers from John Jinapor on that. Mr. Jinapor, why was it necessary for the Vice President to travel with 21 people to UNCTAD?
Well, Ivan, I'm very happy that we're having a conversation about presidential, vice presidential, or ministerial delegations. We can get into all the issues. First of all, to make a comparison of this list is quite unfair in my view, because a delegation led by, for instance, the Chinese delegation, as you alluded to, a delegation led by the Deputy Permanent Representative, Minister Consular, Permanent Mission Geneva, will completely be different from a delegation led by the Vice President of Ghana. In fact, the Deputy Permanent Representative is not equivalent of a Deputy Minister to even start with. And so if you make a comparison of this delegation and that of the Vice President, it will be very unfair, because if the Vice President of China were to travel, delegation will be completely different from the Deputy Permanent Representative. The question as to why the Vice President had to be at UNCTAD, he was invited as the Vice President of Ghana. I'm yet to find out whether the Chinese Vice President was invited.
Was he the only Vice President invited to
the UNCTAD? You can check that out. I'm saying that the Vice President of Ghana was invited, and upon evaluation of the importance of trade for Ghana, within the context of multilateralism, ANTAC, and the rest, the Vice President chose to attend. Now, but let me conclude on one point, Evans, and I don't think that we should quibble over this. I have with me here documents, and I'm completely restrained on ethical basis to put these documents out, where from I have delegations of Vice President Akar, delegations of Vice President Mills, Vice President Aliu Mahama, Vice President John Mahama, and Vice President Baumia. And it will interest you if I were to put documents out upon conferences that these various vice presidents had attended and the sort of delegations.
No, but I want specifics. Let us. It's good to put us in context. What are the delegation numbers for what you have, what you see?
I can say to you on authority that President Mahama as vice president has traveled with a delegation of more than 30, 40, sometimes 50 people before as vice president.
To UNCTAD?
Well, to conferences.
To conference?
Yeah, to conference. But that's the point I'm making to you.
But can you be specific? Which conference and how many exactly?
Well, I'm saying that I'm constrained to put these public official documents out. But I'm saying to you that when the Ablakos take this kind of partisan, political parochial attitude to these sort of issues, it doesn't help the public discourse. We can have a complete discussion about government delegations and the rest, but I have absolutely nothing wrong with the vice president's delegation. The vice president, when he travels anywhere in the world, and any vice president who travels out of the country or within the country will travel necessarily with his ADC. And every vice president of our country has always traveled with an ADC. The vice president will necessarily travel with head of his security. The vice president will necessarily travel with the head of his protocol. And every vice president has done so. Vice President Mahama did so. He always traveled with his ADC. In fact, there's no single person on that delegation who accompanied the vice president who is not accompanied previous vice presidents of our country.
No, but there's one on the list. There's one curious one on the list. A valet, Yakubu Baumia. Must the vice president travel with the valet?
The president travel with a valet. The vice even let me respectfully. You see, sometimes it becomes difficult to interrogate these things publicly because you risk offending people unintentionally. With the greatest of respect, the president and the vice president, and every president, every vice president anywhere in the world, when they travel, we don't expect as a country for the vice president to wake up in the morning, to polish his shoe himself, to iron his clothing. Nobody does that. And so when we make politics out of these things, we sometimes, with the greatest of respect, we lose and the Vice President Mahama travel with a valet all the time. I'm telling you, I have the documents here.
You mean Vice
President? Yes. And Vice President Atamils travel with a valet, just as Vice President Aliu Mahama travel with a valet. And nobody can challenge that. Put it to Okujeto and let him tell me that President Mahama as Vice President never travel with a valet. He always did. I have the name here.
Okay.
He always did. And I don't fault him for that. So I don't expect my Vice President in the person of President Mahama at the time was Vice President to travel for an ANTA conference and wake up in the morning to iron his clothes, or wake up and polish his shoes, or wake up and take care of basic needs of himself. And not just our Vice President. People who are not even at level travel valets. And I'm not too sure that it is extraordinary. Every person of that ranking anywhere in the world have that compliment. And it's something that the state accepts because of the nature of their work.
Yeah.
And I'm saying to you that every Vice President under this fourth Republican dispensation have had this sort of basic attendees when they travel outside, or even when they travel within the country. And I have the documents here. The documentary proof is here.
Mr. Ablakwa, what do you say to that?
Clearly, my brother Abu Jinapo is being very economical with the facts. He refuses to compare like with like. You asked a specific question about UNCTAD conferences. This is an ordinary session, 64th ordinary session of the UNCTAD. I mean, and you look at the list. The vice president himself is an economist. Did he have to go with 4 other economic advisors? He's traveling with a deputy foreign minister, and then he takes along his director for foreign affairs. He's traveling with the deputy trade minister. Then he takes along an officer in his office in charge of business and investment development. I mean, the duplication. And you have made a public pledge that you will protect the public purse. You said that. Nobody put a gun to your head. We expect that is what we will see. I mean, these invitations will come months ahead. These economic advisors can give you whatever advice they have on paper. I mean, you're an economist yourself. If you even want to be accompanied, one should be fine. But all your economic advisors going with you? I mean, and we are attending a conference where these countries who we are begging every day to come to our aid, whether it's planting for food and jobs as the Canadians are doing, or we want $2 billion from China, they are watching. How do you think they see us? And what perception do you think they will have of us?
But Mr. Blackwell,
I am not convinced.
Ivan.
Just a second, Mr. Jinapo. Mr. Blackwell, just a second, Mr. Jinapo. Just give me a second.
If I can come,
yes.
It's important I make this. You see, Abu Jinapo talks about conferences. You see, there are categories of conference. If you are going, for example, for a business show where you are going with a business delegation or a trade and investment show, it will be larger. That delegation will be larger. You have,
but also, Mr. Jinapo, he makes the point that on this UNCTAD conference, the vice president was invited. In fact, I've seen a statement making the rounds from the vice president's office that says that the vice president was the only vice president invited to that conference. And so if you compare it to the others, they point out it will be comparing apples and oranges.
In such, duplications and nebulous functionalities that was at play at the UNCTAD?
Ivan, very quickly, I'm really... Hello, Ivan.
Yes, sir.
I'm terribly tempted to point out to Mr. Blackwell the delegation that Vice President Mahama led to an ordinary session of the United Nations General Assembly. It will blow his mind.
Can you give us the details since you say you have the document?
Once again, let me just like with like. I also have the 2016 list.
Let me finish. If I may finish,
the 2017 list will also blow everybody's mind.
Honorable Blackwell, I will share the list with you off record, and I'm sure that after that you revise your notes. But let me just make one last.
I also have the 2017
let me just make one last.
And I'm sure that
just briefly, gentlemen, so we can wrap up on this.
I'm sure you would also not want me to put out the 2017 but that is
you'll be surprised. Some of them did not even retain.
Yes, gentlemen.
It's very interesting.
Yes, Mr. Jinapo, wrap up for me briefly.
Let me just conclude. Let me wrap up. Vice President Bawumia is discharging a very extraordinary role under this government. We are very proud of that. He is leading an institution, an economic management team. Indeed, I can say on authority as Deputy Chief of Staff, that is one of the most, if not the most important institutions in this government. Nothing happens in this government which has a bearing on the economy without passing through the economic management. He has a very robust, far-reaching, overarching institution in the Akufo-Addo administration. President Mahama, when he was vice president, didn't have an economic management team. If you name one of it, one member of his team, his economic management team, to the Ghanaian people. And so if President Mahama is traveling and he has a delegation of 2 or 3 economists accompanying, it's understandable because he has no economic issues to deal with. This is a vice president who is dealing with all the economic issues of our country. And therefore, the office has come out to explain that some of the members on this delegation were originally billed for other assignments which were not related to UNCTAD. They just had to take on 2 jobs, dealing with 2 issues with one stroke. But the fundamental point I want to make, and make forcefully, Evans, is that Vice President Bawumia is leading a specialized institution which is engaged in very consequential business in this government, and therefore needs aid to assist him in the discharge of the mandate that the president had given. Vice President Mahama did not have that responsibility on Monday because there was no economic management team under the administration.
I'm grateful that you joined us, Mr. Jinapo. Mr. Ablakwa. Hello, Mr. Ablakwa. Yes, hello. Final thoughts, yes.
Once again, Abu Jinapo would not check and recheck his facts. Everybody
it's
knows
a fact.
In Ghana. Everybody in Ghana knows that Vice President Mahama was chairman of the economic management team under President Mills.
There was none.
Kani, Emisa Atta, God bless his soul, and all of them were members of that economic management team. There was an economic management team. It's the same way you are saying there were no guidelines, and I've reluctantly had to expose you that there were guidelines. I have published those guidelines today. So please, let's recheck our facts. And this whole business about the vice president is economic management team and so robust. Please let us see it on the ground. Go and talk to the average Ghanaian. I mean, the hardship. His boss clearly has passed a vote of no confidence in him when he says that times are hard, the economy is not doing well. the president had to concede on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. He is not particularly pleased like you are sounding that the vice president is performing some magic so far as the Ghanaian economy is concerned. That's not what we feel in our lives.
Mr. Blakwa.
People were really suffering. Go to Abusukai, go to the port.
Mr. Blakwa.
Ordinary Ghanaian. So the vice president probably should cut down on his travels and his delegations.
I'm grateful, Mr. Blakwa, for joining us. I'm grateful, Mr. Jinapo, also for sharing thoughts on this. You have to make your own decision, ladies and gentlemen. But that's it for on this conversation of the young talent. I'm grateful, both gentlemen, for sharing your time with us. Still ahead.
Three persons injured as NADMO considers shutting down the Accra Mall following the collapse of the ceiling of parts of the shopping centre.
If the report suggests that other parts of the structure would have been impacted upon, then we could order for a general.
Works and Housing Minister heads to the site. We have details as President Akufo-Addo asks authorities to improve their maintenance culture. Minority in Parliament disputes claims by President Akufo-Addo that his administration has saved the country $7 billion after a renegotiated power deals signed by the Mahama administration.
If President Akufo-Addo now comes and say that, oh, they have renegotiated, make public the 11 cancelled power purchasing agreement.
We'll get to hear the story of a 4-year-old girl left with severe wounds after a teacher lashed her for allowing her brother to do her homework.
He says because she doesn't do her homework or the homework that